Hi, my dear explorers, it's Fen. Welcome back to our cozy retreat, where the noise of the outside world fades to soft murmurs and the allure of magic awaits. This evening, I've curated a heartwarming selection of folktales from the Brothers Grimm. Recently, I stumbled upon a site featuring complete translations of their tales and chose a mix of my absolute favorites and some lesser-known treasures. These stories are as spellbinding as they are eerie, serving as the inspiration for many modern narratives we recognize today. As we journey through them, see if you can spot some familiar echoes of these timeless tales, from beloved classics like Snow White and Little Red Riding Hood, to rarer gems like The 12 Huntsmen and The Old Woman in the Forest. There's a wealth of enchanting adventures ahead. I'd love to hear which grim fairy tales hold a special place in your heart. For now, let the storytelling commence. First, let's take a moment to relax and settle in. Find a comfy spot to sit or lie down where you feel completely at ease. Gently close your eyes and allow yourself a moment of calm. Breathe deeply, drawing the air into your lungs, and then release it slowly, letting any stress melt away with each breath. Feel your body growing lighter as tension flows out of your shoulders, arms, and legs. Now that we're in a state of relaxation, let's journey back to late 18th century Germany, to the quaint town of Hanau, where two brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, were born. Raised in an era of political upheaval and cultural transformation, the brothers found solace and inspiration in the folktales and legends passed down by their community. These weren't just bedtime stories, but a vital part of their heritage. Jacob and Wilhelm's dedication to preserving these tales stemmed from a desire to save oral traditions that were vanishing. They traversed Germany, listening to villagers, travelers, and storytellers, carefully recording each tale with precision and authenticity. Their efforts culminated in the 1812 publication of Kinder- und Hausmärchen, Children's and Household Tales, a compilation that eventually grew to over 200 stories. The reception of their work was varied at first. Some celebrated the brothers for safeguarding German folklore, while others criticized the tales for being too grim and inappropriate for children. As you hear some of these stories tonight, you might find yourself agreeing with the critics, or at least puzzling over the darker elements. Despite the initial criticism, their collection gained widespread appeal, crossing borders and captivating audiences across Europe. The themes of courage, wit, and the battle between good and evil resonated with readers of all ages and backgrounds. In the 20th century, the Grimm's tales reached a new audience when Walt Disney recognized their timeless appeal. Disney reimagined several of their stories, including Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, transforming them into cherished animated classics. While Disney's versions were more polished and child-friendly, they retained the magical essence of the original tales, introducing these narratives to new generations in accessible ways. Today, the influence of the Brothers Grimm is everywhere, in books, films, TV shows, and even video games. Their tales have been retold and reinterpreted countless times, each version adding depth to their cultural legacy. As we dive into tonight's stories, reflect on the enduring impact of the Grimm's work. Let their legacy guide us through these timeless adventures, a tribute to the unyielding power of storytelling. The Juniper Tree. Many years ago, more than 2,000, there lived a wealthy man with a virtuous and beautiful wife. They shared a deep love, but despite their greatest wish, they had no children. The woman prayed day and night for a child, but none came. In front of their house stood a courtyard with a juniper tree. One winter day, the woman was beneath it, peeling an apple. As she peeled, she accidentally cut her finger, and drops of blood fell into the snow. Oh, she sighed deeply. gazing at the red blood on the white snow. A deep sadness filled her heart. If only I had a child with skin as white as snow and lips as red as blood. As she spoke, she felt a wave of calm, a quiet certainty that her wish would come true. She returned inside and time passed. A month later, the snow melted away. By the second month, the world turned green. 3 months in, flowers began to bloom, and by the fourth month, the trees were lush with leaves. Birds filled the forest with their melodies, and blossoms fell like a carpet upon the ground. In the fifth month, the woman stood beneath the juniper tree, breathing in its sweet fragrance, which filled her heart with joy. Overwhelmed, she dropped to her knees. By the sixth month, the tree's fruit grew full and ripe, and the woman grew pensive and quiet. During the seventh month, she picked and greedily ate the juniper berries. Not long after, she fell ill and was overcome with sorrow. By the eighth month, she called her husband to her side. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she said, "If I die, bury me beneath the juniper tree." Her words brought her peace. When the ninth month arrived, she gave birth to a child whose skin was as white as snow and lips as red as blood. Overcome with joy, she held her child and smiled, but the happiness was too great for her, and she passed away. Her husband honored her last wish and buried her beneath the juniper tree. His grief was profound, and he wept for her deeply. In time, his sorrow eased, though he never stopped mourning. Eventually, he remarried and had a daughter with his second wife. The child from his first marriage, a little boy as white as snow and red as blood, remained in the household. The second wife adored her own daughter, but harbored resentment toward the boy. She viewed him as a rival to her daughter's future inheritance. Bitterness took root, and soon she was consumed by envy. The dark influence of evil thoughts twisted her heart. The woman grew harsh with the boy, scolding and striking him at every turn. The poor child lived in fear, finding no peace even at home. One day, while upstairs, the woman's daughter approached her. "Mother, may I have an apple?" "Yes, my child," she said, taking a beautiful apple from a chest. The chest had a heavy lid and a sharp iron lock. "Mother," the daughter asked, "shouldn't my brother have one too?" Her words filled the woman with anger, but she replied, "Yes, when he comes home from school." Looking out the window, she saw the boy approaching. As she watched him, a wicked thought seized her. She snatched the apple from her daughter. "You shall not eat before your brother," she said, and threw the apple into the chest, slamming it shut. When the boy arrived, she greeted him sweetly. "My son, would you like an apple?" she asked, though her eyes burned with malice. "Mother," said the boy, "why do you look so angry?" "Yes, I'd like an apple." She smiled falsely. "Come with me," she said, leading him to the chest. "Take one for yourself." As the boy leaned over to retrieve the apple, she slammed the lid shut with all her strength. His head was severed and fell into the chest among the apples. Panicked, the woman thought quickly. She retrieved a white scarf, tied it around his neck to conceal the injury, and set him in a chair by the door with the apple in his hand. Later, her daughter Marlene came into the kitchen. "Mother," she said, "my brother is sitting by the door, but he's so pale. I asked him for the apple in his hand, but he didn't answer, and I'm frightened." "Go back," her mother said. "If he doesn't reply, box his ears." Marlene approached her brother again. "Brother, give me the apple." When he stayed silent, she lightly boxed his ears, and his head fell off. Terrified, she ran to her mother, wailing, "Oh, mother, I've knocked my brother's head off." The woman calmed her, saying, "Be quiet, my child. What's done is done. We must not let anyone know. We'll cook him into stew." She chopped the boy into pieces, placed them in a pot, and cooked them. Marlene, sobbing, let her tears fall into the stew in place of salt. When the father came home, he sat at the table and asked, "Where is my son?" "He's gone to visit his great uncle for a while," the woman lied. "He'll return soon." The man sighed. "He left without saying goodbye? That isn't like him." The stew was served, and the father found it delicious. The more he ate, the more he craved. "This stew is wonderful," he exclaimed, devouring it until nothing remained. Meanwhile, Marlene went to her dresser, retrieved her finest silk scarf from the bottom drawer, and collected all the bones scattered beneath the table. She wrapped them in the scarf and carried them outside, weeping tears like drops of blood. She placed the bones under the juniper tree on the lush green grass. As soon as she laid them down, a sudden calm washed over her, and she stopped crying. The juniper tree began to sway. Its branches opened and closed, as if celebrating and applauding. Simultaneously, a mist arose from the tree, and at its heart, a brilliant flame blazed. From the fire, an exquisite bird emerged, singing beautifully. It soared into the sky, and once it vanished, the juniper tree returned to its original state. The silk scarf and bones were gone. Marlene, however, felt a deep joy, as though her brother were alive again. Cheerfully, she returned to the house, sat at the table, and ate. The bird flew off and perched on a goldsmith's workshop, singing, "My mother, she ended my life. My father consumed me. My sister Marlene gathered all my bones, wrapped them in a silken cloth, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a marvelous bird am I." The goldsmith, busy crafting a golden chain, heard the song and was enchanted. He stood up, but lost one of his slippers as he stepped over the threshold. Unbothered, he went into the street wearing one slipper and one sock, still donning his leather apron, clutching a golden chain in one hand and tongs in the other. Sunlight streamed down as he called back into the house. "Wife, come outside. Look at this bird. It sings so beautifully." He called for his daughter, her children, the journeyman, the apprentice, and the maid. They all gathered in the street, mesmerized by the bird's splendor. Its vivid red and green feathers shimmered, its neck glowed like pure gold, and its eyes sparkled like stars. "Sing that song again for me," the goldsmith requested. "No," the bird replied. "I don't perform twice for free. You must give me something." "Wife," the goldsmith said, "fetch those red shoes from the top shelf in the shop." She returned with the shoes and handed them to him. "Here, bird," he offered. "Now sing again for me." The bird grasped the shoes in its left claw, returned to the rooftop, and sang once more. "My mother, she ended my life. My father consumed me. My sister Marlene gathered all my bones, wrapped them in a silken cloth, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Tweet, tweet, what a marvelous bird am I." When the bird finished, it flew away, clutching the golden chain in its right claw and the shoes in its left. The bird traveled to a mill, where the steady clickety-clack of grinding echoed, and 20 millers' apprentices were chiseling stone. The bird perched on a linden tree outside and sang, "My mother, she ended my life." One apprentice paused. "My father consumed me." 2 more apprentices stopped, listening intently. With each verse, more apprentices ceased their work until all were transfixed. When the song concluded, one said, "Bird, you sing so wonderfully. Please sing again." "No," the bird replied. "I won't sing again for free. Give me the millstone." "If it were ours to give, you could have it," said the apprentices. They all agreed. Let him have it if he sings again. The bird descended, and the 20 apprentices lifted the heavy stone. It slipped its neck through the center hole, wearing it like a collar, then flew back to the linden tree to repeat the song. Finished, it spread its wings, clutching the golden chain, red shoes, and millstone, and soared to its father's house. Inside, the father, mother, and Marlene sat at the table. "I feel so peaceful," said the father. "So happy." "Not I," the mother replied, trembling. "I sense a dreadful storm approaching." Marlene wept quietly, her handkerchief soaked. The bird perched on the juniper tree outside and began to sing. "My mother, she ended my life." The mother covered her ears, overwhelmed by a storm-like roar and a blinding sensation. "My father consumed me." The father, enraptured, exclaimed, "What a beautiful song. The sun feels so warm, and it smells like cinnamon." "My sister Marlene." Marlene buried her face in her hands, sobbing. The father went outside, enchanted. The bird dropped the golden chain, perfectly fitting around his neck. He returned, delighted, but the mother collapsed, paralyzed by fear. The bird sang again. "My mother, she ended my life." She cried out, wishing she could vanish deep underground. "My father consumed me." She collapsed completely. "My sister Marlene." Marlene went outside, and the bird dropped the red shoes for her. She felt joyous, returning home dancing in her new shoes. The mother, in hysteria, rushed outside. At that moment, crash, the bird released the millstone, crushing her instantly. When the smoke cleared, the brother stood alive and whole. He, his father, and Marlene rejoiced and returned inside to share a meal, their hearts full of happiness. Little Snow White. Once, during the heart of winter, as snowflakes drifted gently from the sky like soft feathers, a queen sat by her window stitching with a needle. The window's frame was crafted from a rich ebony wood. While sewing, she glanced at the falling snow and accidentally pricked her finger. 3 drops of crimson blood landed on the snow. The sight of the vivid red against the pure white struck her as so stunning that she thought, "If only I had a child, with skin as fair as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as dark as this ebony wood." Not long after, her wish came true. She gave birth to a little girl whose complexion was as snowy white, whose lips were deep red, and whose hair was as dark as polished ebony. They named her Snow White. Tragically, the queen passed away shortly after the child's birth. A year later, the king remarried. His new queen was extraordinarily beautiful, but vain and conceited. She could not tolerate the thought of anyone surpassing her beauty. She owned a magical mirror, and every morning she would stand before it and ask, and "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" The mirror always replied, "You, my queen, are the fairest of all." This answer delighted her, for the mirror never lied. As Snow White grew older, her beauty only deepened. By the time she was 7, her radiance outshone even that of the queen. One day, when the queen posed her usual question to the mirror, it responded, "You, my queen, are fair. It is true. But Snow White is 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen was consumed with jealousy. Her envy grew until her face turned pale and her heart dark with hatred. She plotted against the young girl, summoning a huntsman to her chambers. "Take Snow White into the forest," she commanded. "I never wish to lay eyes on her again. End her life and bring me her lungs and liver as proof." The huntsman obeyed and led Snow White deep into the woods. However, as he raised his knife, ready to strike, the child began to weep. "Oh, dear huntsman," she pleaded, "please spare me. I will flee into the forest and never return." Moved by her beauty and innocence, the huntsman took pity on her. "Run, poor child," he said. "The wild beasts will likely claim you soon enough." To deceive the queen, he slaughtered a wild boar, removed its lungs and liver, and presented them to the queen, who had her cook prepare them with salt. The queen devoured them, believing she had consumed Snow White's organs. Meanwhile, Snow White wandered the vast, dark forest. She was terrified and had no idea where to go. She stumbled over sharp rocks and thorny bushes, while wild animals darted past her, leaving her unharmed. Eventually, as twilight fell, she came upon a small house. Entering to rest, she discovered that everything inside was tiny, yet perfectly tidy. A small table was set with 7 plates, 7 knives and forks, and 7 cups. 7 little beds lined the wall, each covered with crisp white sheets. Starving and thirsty, Snow White ate a small portion of bread and vegetables from each plate and sipped a bit of wine from each cup. Exhausted, she tried lying in each bed until she found the 7th one, which felt just right. Whispering a prayer, she fell fast asleep. After nightfall, the house's owners returned. There were 7 dwarfs who worked tirelessly mining in the mountains. Lighting their candles, they immediately noticed something was amiss. "Who has been sitting in my chair?" asked the first. "Who ate from my plate?" said the second. "Who nibbled my bread?" said the third. "Who touched my vegetables?" asked the fourth. "Who used my fork?" asked the fifth. "Who sliced with my knife?" said the sixth. "Who drank from my mug?" exclaimed the seventh. They all turned to their beds. "Who has been lying in my bed?" cried the first 6 dwarfs, but the 7th called out, "Look, someone is sleeping in mine." The dwarfs gathered around and were astonished to find a young girl asleep. They shone their candles on her face and were struck by her beauty. "Heavens above!" they exclaimed. "She is so lovely." The dwarfs let her rest undisturbed. The 7th dwarf had to share beds with his companions, switching between them throughout the night. When morning came, Snow White awoke and was startled to see the dwarfs. However, they were kind and asked her name. "I am Snow White," she replied, explaining how her stepmother had sought to kill her and how she had fled into the forest. The dwarfs offered her shelter on one condition: she would cook, clean, and care for the house. Snow White eagerly agreed and stayed with them. Every morning, the dwarfs went to the mountains to mine for gold and precious ore, leaving Snow White alone. Before departing, they warned her sternly, "Be wary of your stepmother. Do not open the door to anyone." Meanwhile, the wicked queen believed she had rid herself of Snow White and once again stood before her enchanted mirror asking, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" The mirror responded, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White, who lives beyond the mountains with the 7 dwarfs, is 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen froze with shock. She realized the huntsman had tricked her, and Snow White was still alive. Her jealousy burned hotter, and she vowed to eliminate Snow White once and for all. She devised a scheme, using her cunning to craft a disguise. Transforming herself into a poor old peddler woman, she dressed in shabby clothing and painted her face to mask her identity. With a bundle of wares, she traveled across the 7 mountains to the dwarf's house and knocked on the door. "Lovely goods for sale," she called out. Snow White peeked through the window and said, "Good day, kind woman. What are you selling?" "Beautiful wares, my dear," replied the peddler. She held up colorful braided laces for bodices. Snow White, enchanted by the sight, thought to herself, "This simple woman cannot mean me harm," and unbolted the door to purchase a lace. "You are so lovely, child," the old woman said sweetly. let me lace you up properly." Snow White stood before her as the woman began tying the lace, but the peddler pulled it so tightly that Snow White could no longer breathe. "You are the fairest of all," the old woman sneered and hurried away, leaving Snow White to collapse to the ground. That evening, the dwarves returned home and found Snow White lying motionless on the floor. Alarmed, they cut the lace, freeing her to breathe again. Slowly, she revived and told them what had happened. "This was no ordinary peddler," they said. "It was your wicked stepmother in disguise. Be cautious and let no one in while we are away." The queen returned to her castle, confident her plan had succeeded. Standing before her mirror, she asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" But the mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White beyond the mountains, with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times fairer than you." Her fury boiled over. "I will find a way to destroy her for good," she vowed. This time, she used her dark magic to create a poisoned comb. Once again, she disguised herself, this time as a different old woman, and crossed the 7 mountains to the dwarf's house. Knocking at the door, she called out, "Lovely wares for sale, beautiful combs." Snow White looked out and said, "I cannot let you in. The dwarfs have forbidden it." "No need to let me in," said the old woman. "Just take a look at this exquisite comb." She held it up, and Snow White, drawn to its beauty, hesitated. The woman reassured her, "Surely there is no harm in looking." Snow White opened the door just enough to take the comb. The woman offered to help her try it, and Snow White agreed. But as soon as the poisoned comb touched her hair, she fell to the ground, unconscious. "Your beauty is your downfall," cackled the woman, leaving Snow White for dead. When the dwarfs returned, they found her lifeless once again. They examined her and removed the comb, which broke the spell. Snow White awoke and recounted what had happened. "This is the work of your stepmother," they warned her again. "Do not let anyone inside." Back at the castle, the queen once more consulted her mirror. To her dismay, it repeated, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White beyond the mountains, with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times fairer than you." Her rage consumed her. She retreated to a secret room where she crafted her most sinister creation yet, a poisoned apple. Its red and white exterior was so tempting that no one could resist. The queen disguised herself as a humble peasant and set out for the dwarf's house. Knocking on the door, she called out, "Fresh apples for sale." Snow White, peering out, said, "I cannot let anyone in." "That's fine, dear," the woman replied. "I'll leave one as a gift." She held out the beautiful apple, slicing it in half. "See? I'll eat the white half, and you may have the red half." Seeing the woman eat, Snow White believed it safe and took the red half. But as soon as she bit into it, the poison took hold. She collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The queen laughed wickedly. "Now you are finished, Snow White," she sneered and returned to her castle. When the dwarfs returned home, they found Snow White dead. Despite their efforts to revive her, she did not stir. Heartbroken, they laid her in a glass coffin inscribed with her name and the title of princess. Her body did not decay. She remained as beautiful as ever. Years passed until one day, a prince wandered through the forest and discovered the coffin. Enchanted by Snow White's beauty, he begged the dwarfs to let him take the coffin, promising to cherish and honor her forever. Reluctantly, they agreed. As the prince's servants carried the coffin, they stumbled, dislodging the piece of poisoned apple from Snow White's throat. She opened her eyes, alive once more. "Where am I?" she asked. "With me?" said the prince joyfully. I love you more than anything. Come with me to my castle and be my queen." Snow White agreed, and their wedding was celebrated with great splendor. The wicked queen, curious to see the new bride, consulted her mirror once more. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but the young queen is 1,000 times fairer than you." Furious, the queen attended the wedding, only to find Snow White alive and radiant. Filled with terror and rage, she was punished for her cruelty, forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she collapsed lifeless. Snow White and the prince lived happily ever after, their joy undisturbed. Little Red Cap. Once, there was a kind-hearted little girl. Everyone who met her adored her, but no one loved her more than her grandmother, who could never stop thinking of things to gift her. One day, the grandmother gave her a small hood made of crimson velvet because it suited her so perfectly. The girl liked it so much that she wore it constantly, and soon people began calling her Little Red Hood. One morning, her mother said, "Come here, Little Red Hood. I have a slice of cake and a flask of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is unwell and frail, and these will strengthen her. Be polite and pass along my regards. Stay on the path, behave properly, and don't stray, or you might trip, break the bottle, and leave your grandmother with nothing. When you get to her home, remember to say good morning, and don't start nosing around every corner first." "I'll do everything just as you've asked," said Little Red Hood, nodding obediently. Her grandmother's cottage was in the woods, about half an hour's walk from the village. As Little Red Hood entered the forest, she was approached by a wolf. She didn't know he was a cunning predator and felt no fear. "Good day to you, Little Red Hood," said the wolf. "Thank you, and good day to you," she replied. "Where are you heading so early, Little Red Hood?" he inquired. "To grandmother's house," she answered. "And what are you carrying beneath your cloak?" "Grandmother isn't feeling well, so I'm bringing her some cake and wine we baked yesterday. They should help her regain her strength." "Where does your grandmother live?" the wolf asked. "Her cottage is about 15 minutes from here, beneath 3 towering oak trees. There's a hedge of hazel bushes nearby. Surely you must know it," replied Little Red Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "That young girl will make a delicious treat, and if I'm clever, I can enjoy both her and the old woman." He strolled alongside Little Red Hood for a while before saying, "Little Red Hood, look at all the wonderful flowers surrounding us. Why not take a moment to admire them and listen to how beautifully the birds are singing? You're walking along as though you're on your way to school. The forest is such a magical place." Little Red Hood glanced around. When she saw sunlight streaming through the trees and flowers carpeting the ground, she thought, "If I pick a fresh bouquet for grandmother, she'll be thrilled. There's plenty of time. I won't be late." She left the path and began gathering flowers. Each time she plucked one, she saw another that seemed even prettier further away, leading her deeper into the forest. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" called the grandmother. "It's Little Red Hood. I've brought you cake and wine. Please open the door." "Lift the latch," called the grandmother weakly. "I'm too tired to get up." The wolf raised the latch, entered, and immediately devoured the grandmother. Then he dressed in her clothes, put her cap on his head, climbed into her bed, and drew the curtains. Little Red Hood, still chasing flowers, suddenly remembered her grandmother. She hurried to the cottage and found the door ajar. Entering the sitting room, she felt uneasy. "Why do I feel so nervous? I usually love visiting grandmother." She called out, "Good morning," but received no reply. Approaching the bed, she pulled back the curtains and was startled by her grandmother's odd appearance. "Oh, grandmother, what large ears you have." "All the better to hear you with," replied the wolf. "Oh, grandmother, what large eyes you have. All the better to see you with. Oh, grandmother, what enormous hands you have. All the better to grab you with. Oh, grandmother, what a frightfully huge mouth you have. All the better to eat you with," the wolf exclaimed. He leaped from the bed and swallowed Little Red Hood in one gulp. Satisfied, the wolf lay back down, dozed off, and began snoring thunderously. A huntsman passing nearby heard the loud snores and thought, "That old woman sounds terrible. I better check on her." He entered the house and found the wolf sleeping in the bed. "So, here you are, you wicked creature," he said. "I've been searching for you for ages." He was about to fire his gun, but reconsidered. The old woman might still be alive inside. Instead, he took a pair of scissors and carefully cut open the wolf's belly. After a few snips, he saw the crimson hood, and soon Little Red Hood emerged, exclaiming, "It was so dark inside the wolf." Shortly after, the grandmother crawled out, weak but alive. To prevent the wolf from escaping, Little Red Hood filled his belly with heavy stones. When the wolf woke up and tried to flee, the weight dragged him down and he fell dead. The huntsman skinned the wolf and took the pelt home. Grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine, regaining her strength, while Little Red Hood thought, "I'll never disobey my grandmother again, or stray from the path." The 12 Huntsmen. Once, there was a prince who was deeply in love with his betrothed. One day, as they sat happily together, a messenger arrived with urgent news. The prince's father was gravely ill and wished to see him one last time. The prince said to his beloved, "I must leave you now. Keep this ring as a token of my love. Once I become king, I will return to claim you as my queen." He departed at once. Upon reaching his father, the prince found him on his deathbed. The ailing king said, "My dearest son, I long to see you one final time. Promise me this: marry the bride of my choosing." He then named a particular princess as his son's future wife. In his grief, the prince, without thinking, replied, "Yes, dear father, your wish will be honored." Shortly afterward, the king took his last breath and passed away. When the prince ascended the throne and the mourning period ended, he felt bound to fulfill his father's request. He proposed to the princess who had been chosen for him, and she accepted. Meanwhile, his original fiancée learned of this and was so heartbroken by his unfaithfulness that she nearly perished from sorrow. Her father, seeing her distress, asked, "My dear child, what troubles you so? Ask for anything, and it shall be yours." After some thought, she said, "Father, I wish for 11 maidens who look exactly like me in appearance, height, and build." "If it's possible, your wish will be granted," her father replied. He sent messengers throughout the kingdom, and soon 11 young women were found who matched the princess perfectly. When they arrived, the princess had 12 identical huntsmen's outfits made, one for each of them. She wore the 12th herself. Then she bid farewell to her father and set out with the 11 girls. They journeyed to the court of her former betrothed, whom she still loved deeply. Upon arrival, she asked if the king needed huntsmen and if he would hire all 12 of them. The king, not recognizing her, agreed, saying, "You are fine-looking fellows. I shall gladly take you into my service." Thus, they became the king's huntsmen. The king owned a lion that was no ordinary beast. It possessed the ability to perceive all secrets and hidden truths. One evening, the lion said to the king, "You believe your 12 huntsmen are men, but you're mistaken. They're women." The king replied, "That can't be true." "How can you prove it?" The lion suggested, "Scatter peas across the floor of your antechamber, Men walk steadily and won't disturb the peas, but women with lighter steps will shuffle or trip, scattering them. The king found this suggestion intriguing and ordered peas to be strewn across the floor. A loyal servant, who liked the huntsmen, overheard the plan and warned them. The princess thanked him and instructed the maidens, "Step firmly as you walk across the peas." The next morning, the king summoned the huntsmen. They strode across the antechamber so confidently that not a single pea shifted. The king turned to the lion and said, "You were wrong. They walk just like men." The lion countered. They anticipated the test and adjusted their behavior. Set spinning wheels in the antechamber next. Men won't give them a second glance, but women will be drawn to them. The king approved of the idea and placed spinning wheels in the hall. Again, the loyal servant warned the huntsman. The princess said to her companions, "Pay no attention to the spinning wheels." When summoned the next morning, the 12 huntsmen walked past the wheels without even glancing at them. The king told the lion, "You're mistaken again. They didn't so much as look at the wheels." The lion replied, "They knew they were being tested and acted accordingly." But the king no longer believed the lion's claims. The huntsmen often accompanied the king on hunts, and as time passed, he grew increasingly fond of them. One day, while they were hunting, news arrived that the king's bride was on her way to the castle. When the true bride heard this, the pain was so intense that she collapsed. The king, believing something had happened to his favorite huntsman, hurried to help. As he removed her glove, he saw the ring he had once given his first fiancée. Looking closely, he recognized her face. Overcome with emotion, the king embraced her and said, "You are mine, and I am yours, forever and always." He immediately sent a messenger to the other bride, asking her to return to her kingdom, explaining, "I have found the one who truly belongs to me. An old key that fits perfectly does not need to be replaced by a new one." The king and his true bride were married in a joyful celebration. The lion, having been proven truthful all along, was welcomed back into the king's favor.